Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from the Srimad Bhagavad-Gita as it is, Chapter 2, Text 13, Chapter titled Contents of the Gita Summarized. Dehino sminyata dehe Komaram yovanam jara Tata dehantara praptir Dirastatra namuyate Dehina of the embodied Asmin in this Yata as Dehe in the body Kamaram, boyhood, Yovanam, youth, Jara, old age, Tata, similarly, Deha Antara, of transference of the body, Prapti, achievement, Dhira, the sober, Tatra, thereupon, Na, never. Muyati is deluded. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti-Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. As the embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. Purport. Since every living entity is an individual soul, each is changing his body every moment, manifesting sometimes as a child, sometimes as a youth, and sometimes as an old man. Yet the same spirit soul is there and does not undergo any change. This individual soul finally changes the body at death and transmigrates to another body. And since it is sure to have another body in the next birth, either material or spiritual, there was no cause for lamentation by Arjuna on account of death, neither for Bhishma nor for Drona, for whom he was so much concerned. Rather, he should rejoice for their changing bodies from old to new ones, thereby rejuvenating their energy. Such changes of body account for varieties of enjoyment or suffering, according to one's work in life. So Bhishma and Drona, being noble souls, were surely going to have spiritual bodies in the next life, or at least life in heavenly bodies for superior enjoyment of material existence. So in either case, there was no cause of lamentation. Any man who has perfect knowledge of the constitution of the individual soul, the supersoul, and nature, both material and spiritual, is called a dhira, or a most sober man. Such a man is never deluded by the change of bodies. The Mayavadi theory of oneness of the spirit soul cannot be entertained on the ground that the spirit soul cannot be cut into pieces as a fragmental portion. Such cutting into different individual souls would make the Supreme cleavable or changeable against the principle of the Supreme Soul's being unchangeable. As confirmed in the Gita, the fragmental portions of the Supreme exist eternally, sanatana, and are called kshara. That is, they have a tendency to fall down into material nature. These fragmental portions are eternally so, and even after liberation, the individual soul remains the same, fragmental. But once liberated, he lives an eternal life in bliss and knowledge with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The theory of reflection can be applied to the Supersoul, who is present in each and every individual body and is known as Paramatma. He is different from the individual living entity. When the sky is reflected in water, the reflections represent both the sun and the moon and the stars also. The stars can be compared to the living entities, and the sun or the moon to the Supreme Lord. The individual fragmental spirit soul is represented by Arjuna, and the Supreme Soul is the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna. They are not on the same level, as it will be apparent in the beginning of the 4th chapter. If Arjuna is on the same level with Krishna, and Krishna is not superior to Arjuna, then their relationship of instructor and instructed becomes meaningless. If both of them are deluded by the illusory energy Maya, then there is no need of one being the instructor and the other the instructed. Such instruction would be useless, because in the clutches of Maya, no one can be an authoritative instructor. Under the circumstances, it is admitted that Lord Krishna is the Supreme Lord, superior in position to the living entity, Arjuna, who is a forgetful soul deluded by Maya. Translation again. As the embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. Om Jnana Timirandasya Garanjana Shalakaya Chakshun Vataminatazmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Lankayate Guram Yat Kripatamam Vande Shri Gurum Dinatanam. So this 2nd chapter, summary study, contents of the Gita summarized. So we've heard Srila Prabhupada say so many times that the beginning stage of spiritual life is to understand that one is not his body. Very simple premise initially, but many people who begin spiritual life, either by tasting Krishna Prasadam or appreciating devotees, chanting the holy name, Agyata Sukriti, they don't have this realization initially. And it takes some time to have the philosophical understanding how this is so. Just like it's described here, as the embodied soul continually passes from boyhood to youth to old age. So we have that very nice diorama upstairs in Srila Prabhupada's museum across from the Samadhi, that changing bodies. And that also represented here in one of the color plates. So that gives a very graphic representation and helps one to see things from that visual perspective, which we're so much attached to in the beginning. We don't have the appreciation of what it means to hear from an authority. Otherwise, everyone who would read Bhagavad-Gita with an open mind, who accepts that the premise, what is it? One friend of mine used to say, said, if you have a question, it means you don't have an answer. So this was one of the first things we would put forward to those who were coming up to visit the Bhakti program on 55th Street. That devotee, because so many people would come with a very challenging attitude. And they would immediately be shut down by this very expert preacher who said, if you have a question, it means you don't have an answer. Now, if you want the answer is here in this Bhagavad Gita. And we sent many people home with Bhagavad Gita who were not capable of listening. They were just too argumentative. They had no respect for authority and had no training, no culture. It just wasn't part of their, how can you say, their repertoire. So then they would come back many times, a few days later, a week later, having submissively read Bhagavad Gita, a completely changed person, asking questions that were relevant and that could lead them to a higher understanding. So we see that this, how important it is to, step by step, have the association of Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada's purports, the devotees who are expert, having realized this information, pratyaksha, who can properly explain it according to time and circumstances. Otherwise, many people how can you say, how many people here have had an out-of-body experience? Anyone say? Many devotees have had out-of-body experiences. They have and this has helped us to realize, in one sense, that we're not the body. It may seem very, how can you say, unusual, but the fact remains that many devotees, when they read this Bhagavad-Gita the first time, they immediately identified how I am not this body. Immediately realized the truth of this very simple concept, that I am not this body. In Prabhupada's words, said simple, not Prabhupada's words, but the words of the Gita and then Prabhupada's explanation, brought it out very clearly, very succinctly. And then building on that, we can understand everything else in perspective. There's a letter on Srila Prabhupada's desk now from a person who's asking, why is there a discrepancy in the Sanskrit of this literature and that literature? Why are the Vedas described as being 3,000 years old? How is that possible? So many challenging questions. And Prabhupada is answering very carefully that one can understand things by hearing the evidence, from inquiring submissively. He mentioned that point. Go on inquiring submissively. Because this is the very important thing, that when one tadvidi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te gyanam gyanastappada. One has to hear from someone who has seen the truth. He has to approach a spiritual master and hear from that person only, not from any other person. But then that qualification is that he must have that mood of surrender, to accept the authority, not challenging. Knowing that if I have a question, I really don't have an answer. So just because many people will give different, how can you say, viewpoints regarding this particular shloka. But from our perspective, we know it's the basis. To understand I am not this body gives us the ability to appreciate the more sublime, esoteric principles later on, without having to, how can you say, constantly reassess our limited material faculties to try to adjust and make this so-called leap of faith that people find so difficult. How can I believe this? How can I believe this is 5,000 years old? How can I believe that these people are, the self-realized soul can impart knowledge unto you because he's seen the truth? They don't have that capacity. They're taught to challenge everything. We don't accept authority. We challenge authority. And so therefore they're disqualified in one sense. We all wanted to challenge authority. There's no question. That was there. But once I can accept that these things are beyond my ability to perceive with the material mundane senses, I have to accept that what is the means then to rise above the modes of material nature. I am a product of the modes of material nature. My mind is a product of the modes of material nature. My senses are only interacting with the modes of material nature. And then what is it that develops the concepts that allow me to transcend this? How does one's intelligence become, how can you say, superior to the mind and senses? Because the intelligence is also not transcendental. But Prabhupada said it is the, what's that verse? Anyway, I'll think of it in a second. That one has to rise through the platform, tadarajas tamo bhavo, kama lobhadayas cheta eteranadvidam, stipam sapam prasidati. That one has to come first through the modes and attain the platform of goodness, at least goodness. Maybe not Shuddha Sattva. But Prabhupada said that knowledge only begins when one has reached the level of goodness. Therefore, we emphasize the regulative principles to cut the 4 pillars of sinful life. Because one, while engaging in these activities, his sinful activities, he cannot achieve the mode of goodness. And without achieving the mode of goodness, his intelligence cannot be purified. He cannot access any real knowledge. So that's why mundane scholars can read the same thing over and over and over. But because they have not achieved that level of just mundane goodness, then how can they be eligible to enter into this transcendental Raja Vidya Raja Guyam Pravichamidamuttamam Pratyaksavagamam Dhamyam Susukam Kartamavyam. This knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the purest knowledge, and because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, that's another word, pratyaksha, direct perception. Pratyaksha is one of the three forms of evidence. Direct perception. Pratyaksha vagamam dharmyam susukam kartamavyam. It is everlasting and joyfully performed. So this is why we see devotees always described as bright-faced, happy, enthusiastic. You don't see any sad faces in Mangal Artik. I mean, maybe someone who's just a guest. But you see the devotees how eager and anxious to get the opportunity to present themselves before the deities and say, I'm here, see me, see me. So this is, without a doubt, so the most secret of all secrets. So how does one enter into this secret? When we read these things and we see that this is, in one sense, an open secret. Chant these holy names and your life will be sublime. That was the first introduction I had to Krishna consciousness. A devotee giving me a mantra card that was stapled to a bag that had a lagdu inside, special prasadam, made in the New York temple. That was so, the prasadam itself was sublime. Just to taste the prasadam gave an indication that if this food is so good, then the philosophy, who can create this? The philosophy must be amazing. So there's a lot of correlation there. Good things, they're indicators. You know, you meet these nice devotees on the street and they speak so convincingly, so authoritatively, not with false ego or argumentatively or demeaningly, or like, it's just matter-of-factly. I was very challenged. I was asking, what do you have to do with Krishna? Because I read Bhagavad-Gita. It was a common, pursuit of anyone who considered himself well-read. But I had never seen anything in Bhagavad-Gita that mentioned, devotees dancing, anything. It was taking place on a battlefield. So where did these people come in chanting and dancing like this? So I challenged, I says, what do you have to do with Bhagavad-Gita? And he very calmly explained, that this is this Bhagavad-Gita, and what do they say? This science as it is, this supreme science, thus, what is that? How does that go? Appeared to be lost. Anyway, you know that verse. And so he just carefully explained that this 5,000-year-old text was passed down from master to student, etc., and as he could explain it to me, who knew nothing about spiritual life. And eventually he came to Lord Chaitanya, who also, I had no idea who is Lord Chaitanya. He's not in the Bhagavad Gita. And he said, Lord Chaitanya, 500 years ago, started the Sankirtan movement that you see here, of which the basis is the Bhagavad Gita. And this is the fruits of this movement, this renaissance brought to America by, and he was describing Srila Prabhupada, our teacher. And that's, of course, when he tried to sell me a Bhagavad Gita, but I politely refused. But I just was not eligible at the time. I wasn't ready. But I took the mantra card into Prasadam, and I eventually visited the temple. So he accomplished his purpose to distribute love of Godhead. And that's exactly what it was. It's not that he's distributing a mancha card and prasadam and this is disconnected from the entire concept. He was distributing love of God, and somehow or other, I was fortunate to be there at that particular time and place. 5th Avenue, New York City, 42nd Street, in front of the main library. I used to work at the main library. So back to this particular shloka, and then after having read this, moved into the temple, you realize the depth of this philosophy, but all beginning from when I took that book home eventually and sat down to read it and realized that none of these concepts were foreign to me. Everything seemed just familiar. I didn't know how or why. But I had no arguments. There was nothing in here that I felt was, how can you say, foreign. And I appreciated, to the best of my knowledge, to my limited capacity, and the covered condition I was. And that was enough to allow me to say, I want to live with these people and learn more. So everything was accomplished. Everything was done. This is the importance, and we'll always go back to book distribution, that unless one is reading Srila Prabhupada's books, if that person hadn't been able to, can you imagine if he'd come up to me and he'd said, because I mentioned Bhagavad-Gita, and this person knew exactly basically what to say to answer my question and to give me a whole synopsis in a very limited amount of time, not more than 2 or 3 minutes. Took me from the battlefield of Kurukshetra to Lord Chaitanya to 1966 or 65 in New York. Very smoothly, how this movement came here, what it represented. Ancient spiritual knowledge, meant to liberate the consciousness, the living entity, and the entire world. Very bold, you know. They're speaking this on the street on 5th Avenue. So we're very fortunate. And this verse, honestly, you know, is very, this one, and for the soul there's neither birth nor death, nor having once been does he ever cease to be. These verses made a strong impact on me in the beginning. I could really identify with this sense of eternality, not wanting to die, not feeling at all inclined towards, you know, old age, disease, or death. That these are definitely foreign concepts. They were not natural. I always wondered about them, and everything was complete. Om Purnama Dak Purnamidam. Complete. And all of my misgivings due to incomplete knowledge of the complete were finished by reading Bhagavad-Gita one time. Just one time. And the only book I had read, actually I didn't even, just prior to receiving Bhagavad-Gita, I had read Reservoir of Pleasure. That pamphlet was printed and distributed in mass, tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, on the New York City subways. Still being distributed on the New York City subways. So that was the first pamphlet, Prabhupada's essays, Reservoir of Pleasure and Who is Crazy? That was the essay, Who is Crazy? Very clear. And when I read it, I thought, this person is speaking directly to me. How is it that I could understand these concepts that, you know, normally, I mean, it was totally foreign. I was reading Western philosophy or, you know, some Buddhist philosophy or Taoist philosophy, but somehow or other I'd never come across these concepts in any of those, really, you know. So there'll be, so what else? Prabhupada says, any man who has perfect knowledge of the constitution of the individual soul, the super soul, and nature, both material and spiritual, is called a dhira, or a most sober man. Such a man is never deluded by the change of bodies. Yeah, but somehow or other we have this knowledge. It's been given to us. But yet, anyone can acknowledge that this struggle remains, that there's a battle to, how can you say, constantly reinforce everything that we have heard from the lips of our spiritual master or read from his books on a daily basis in order to continue this process of conquering over the mind and senses. It is not a foregone conclusion. It is not a fait accompli. These things have to be done continuously. When one becomes complacent, we see that this is where Maya finds her openings. One thinks that, you know, I've been a devotee for 20, 30 years, 40 years, whatever. And that I can be a little relaxed in my sadhana or my reading or my hearing or whatever it is. My attention, my control of the senses. You see it very subtly. You know, that someone just chooses to ignore certain aspects of our routines. And this is due to, well, one sense, familiarity. You know, Prabhupada said familiarity breeds contempt. One gets comfortable in that this is just a lifestyle. I get up, I bathe, I put on tilak, I chant a few mantras, I dress a certain way, I attend a certain program. It's like going back to parochial school. When we were kids, you went to a religious school. In India, I'm sure they have also. They have the different, even the madrasas. In Islam, they have madrasas. They have gurukuls. They have, in Roman Catholicism, they have the parochial schools. And everyone is just following blindly, just along, just ritualistically, culturally. And so unless one has actually accepted the transcendental aspects of this particular, this is not a mundane culture. This is not Hindu culture, Bengali culture, it is Sanatan Dharma. If someone is thinking that this is some other mundane, ethnic variation of a, how can you say, an indigenous philosophy, then he has missed the point entirely. It's as if he's still thinking he's the body. This is exactly what we're discussing here. The fact that the Vedas have their origins here is almost irrelevant. We have no idea what the future brings. In the last 10,000 years, the lines on the map have been drawn and redrawn 1,000,000 times. India is now this one small area. Bharatvarsh was once considered to be the entire planet. So in 1,000, 2,000 years, India may cease to exist geographically, for all we, not geographically, but politically. Yeah, it could be part of another country. Right? In the past, China could have been one thing, and it's expanded. Russia is the same way. Mongolia previously. The Islamic Empire was, you know, 2/3 of the globe at one point. And it's all become. So in a few hundred years, this could all be different. There'll be no so-called remnants of Hindu culture, but there will always be Sanatan Dharma. As long as the devotees maintain their strict attitude of adherence to the philosophy as it was delivered to us by Srila Prabhupada, without any adulteration, without any compromise. You know, there are certain things that cannot be changed if one has firmly fixed this realization within his heart. It was like when Srila Prabhupada was getting ready to leave the planet, and devotees were obviously upset for various reasons, you know, not necessarily right reasons, but and Prabhupada said, I'm not leaving you. So such a simple statement. I'm not leaving you. I am simply entering into your heart. So this principle that the spiritual master, that we were directed to the spiritual master by the Chaita Guru. And again, you see this principle goes full circle, and that the spiritual master again enters within the heart by the devotee's attachment to his instructions, to his relationship. Because that relationship can never be broken unless one decides to break it. That certainly one can discard it. In Mayapur, actually it doesn't matter where, but one devotee came to Srila Prabhupada and sought his blessings to find out another guru. So you can imagine the mentality of that person. And Prabhupada was joking in the class. Just see, this person came and asked me to give blessings to find another guru. So this is, if we observe the situation carefully, it doesn't have to be so obvious in that respect, because the guru is anything which is the closest to one's heart, mind, soul. So one's guru can be the radio, the soap opera that's on TV that one attentively watches every day without fail. And he takes all his knowledge from that source of information. So there are all types of gurus. Even devotees, sometimes they have to be careful that they're not becoming enamored artificially by some false guru that just a distraction. But it happens that we think, oh, I can get more knowledge from this source, or I can get more knowledge from that source. But how is that possible? Sarvasya chaham riddhi sani vishto matak smritya jnanam apavanam cha. Krishna says, I am seated in the heart. And from me comes knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. And there are so many verses like this. Yasya devi parabhaktir yata deve tata guru. One who has implicit faith in the spiritual master, Krishna, the Shastras, all the imports of Vedic knowledge are automatically revealed. So how is that? Why would I be, impatient, or why would I think that I can, if Krishna is saying this, the Shastras is saying this, the Puranas, the Itihas, everything agrees. There is no conflict. There's only harmony. That this knowledge is all within. Chaita Darpanam Marjanam Bhava Mahadavagni Nirvapanam Shre. Lord Chaitanya, the first shloka, how important. Cleansing the heart of all the dust accumulated. And Prabhupada used that so many times. That if we cleanse the heart, cleanse the dust, what is that dust? Then what does that mean? That the mirror, what am I cleansing? Dust on the heart, there's nothing. But dust on the mirror of the heart, yes, then one can see himself, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Super Soul, like this. He gets that, what's that verse? Brahmeti Paramatmeti Bhagavan iti shabdite. The absolute truth is known in 3 phases of existence. Right? So these things are there when the heart is cleansed. One sees himself in relationship to Krishna. He doesn't see himself separate from Krishna. He doesn't look in the mirror and see that I'm just here alone without any shelter. He always feels himself under the shelter of Krishna. He always feels. And this is the safe. This is how we know that I'm properly situated. That I feel situated at the shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. So if one is not feeling like that, if he's not able to feelingly pray to the Lord, because we can all say these mantras or repeat them, just like children repeat some verse nursery rhymes. But if it is not feelingly, with that attitude of surrender, then the result will not be there. And we will not get that sense of shelter, that sense of protection. And that is what we want. We don't want nadanam, najanam, nasundarim, kavita, vajagesh. We want to actually feel that I don't want any of these things. I only want your causes, devotional service, birth after birth. That's all I want. I don't want anything else. We have to be convinced of that. I'm not looking for, a buyout, a pension. I'm not serving for 20 years and then thinking that I'm going to get something, lump sum package. I'm serving here simply for the pleasure of my spiritual master. And then everything will fall into place automatically. Prabhupada told us in Mayapur, Krishna can give you anything you want, any material desire. He said, if you want big, big buildings, you can have it. And he said this in Mayapur in 1976. There was no big, big buildings. And he's talking to devotees. He said, you can have it. He said, but you will have to take another birth. And there will be a gap of millions of years. Millions of years. Why would we want to jeopardize that? If you ask any intelligent person, any intelligent devotee, would you like to have some material benefit, or would you like to go back to Godhead? Any devotee should say, no, I want to go back to Godhead this lifetime. But then you have to ask it, then why are you engaged in all material activities? It says one should never engage in material activities if one is attempting to execute devotional service purely. So we have to be convinced like that. One can work, he can do whatever he needs to do to keep body and soul together. If one is a grahasta, he has to serve wife, children, provide for them. But one should not be like the ass. Probably very famous. You don't see so many nowadays. But when we first came to Vrindavan, you could still see the washermen and their donkeys overloaded with laundry, barely able to walk. And when it's wet, so much heavier. And they would stumble, but they would maneuver up the banks of the Jamuna and walk through the streets. And for what? To get a little grass which is available freely everywhere. So that, and of course that's that verse, Matirna Krishna Paratak Sutova Mito Vipadyeti Guravitanam Adanta Gobir Vishitam Timisham Puna Punaschavata Chavananam. Chewing the chewed. That which can easily be had any place. And one is simply trying to squeeze out this pleasure which has already been squeezed out of it. It is not there. There is nothing pleasurable in the material world except to serve the Supreme Lord. But one has to be convinced of this. He has to be convinced. And then he can act. Prabhupada also said, Shobharo cannot act. And he was talking about, even if you dress up like a devotee and you act, so-called act like a devotee. A Shobharo cannot act means it's like fake medicine. He has no potency to deliver a person. How powerful Srila Prabhupada's books are. One example, there's Nectar of Devotion. And just after Srila Prabhupada left, we were in Vrindavan still. We went to Barshan. And in between Barshana and Sriji, you walk that path, beautiful, in between the faces of Lord Brahma. And we stopped to chant our Gayatri on some abandoned old building. As we were chanting, some Baba came up. And even in those days, there still weren't so many Westerners coming and traipsing around the Braj. There were, we'd been here for a few years, but This person came, he saw us, and he had never seen Westerners in Braj. Just, we had later found out. So when he saw us, and he saw we were chanting Gayatri, he waited a few minutes till we were done. And he came up to us very respectfully and said, "Where are you from?" And we said, "We're Americans." And he said, there are Vaishnavas in America? He said, "Yes, many. Vaishnavas all over the world." And we asked, "Well, what are you doing here?" He says, "I'm doing my bhajan." He had taken over an abandoned room, which had a covering, but not really, it was an opening for a door. There was no door per se. But he occupied this area, and in it he had a tempura, a harmonium, and he was sitting there doing, he had offered us to cook us some prasadam. He naturally very generous, even though there were 5 or 6 of us. We thought, we didn't want to impose on him. We thought, what's he going, when we looked at this place, what's he going to cook and how is he going to cook? He said, no. So he sat down, they handmade chapatis, delicious, everything was clicked. Pot of dal came right away. And then as I'm sitting, I looked, and in the corner, because that's the way the room, the light entered, and in the corner of the room, they have these niches in the walls in all these old buildings. And on that niche, there was a pink Nectar Devotion paperback. And I thought to myself, says, "Where did you get that?" He said, "I found that in a friend's house in New Delhi. I read that book, I left everything, and I came to Vrindavan." He had never met a devotee. He only read Nectar Devotion. But he understood it enough to renounce everything and go and live in Braj. And we were amazed that, here, and he had never realized that there were, that there was a, even though I showed him in the back, I said, he had no idea what is ISKCON or ISKCON centers. He didn't make any sense to him whatsoever. And then we told him, and we discussed, but hadn't read Bhagavad-Gita. I mean, had read some other version of Bhagavad-Gita, but had nothing changed anything. And he was an intelligent young man, maybe at that time he was maybe about 30. So he might have been even a little older than we were, because we were still 25, 26, 27, like that. So this is the power of, and the potency that Prabhupada's books have, not ordinary in any way, shape, or form. And so this is, it encourages us that when we hear about these wonderful stories, which is why it's so nice to hear about the success of the devotees who meet individuals who have read these books and who want all these books and how it's changed their lives. And then we have to think, well, I want so much more to appreciate from their perspective, to feel again how it was when I first read these books almost. How much enthusiasm is there to just dive right into the pots. That was always the first service in the temples, cleaning Krishna's pots. So that level of enthusiasm is very important, and we have to try to maintain it to the extent possible. And that utsahan nistya daryad, it's essential. Prabhupada said, even if you don't feel like dancing, dance. And the bliss will come, the enthusiasm will come. So this is a very important thing. And that is the same for every service. When you're distributing books, sometimes in the beginning, maybe you haven't done for some time, you feel a little rusty to approach someone. And the words are not just, they're not flowing out. But it doesn't matter, as long as you are there in the Yuga Dharma, in the arena of sacrifice, Krishna will empower you. It's not us in any case. He's the one who's interacting. So we just have to be the instrument. Nimitta matram bhava savyasachan. So hopefully the next devotee tomorrow will give you a different interpretation, I'm sure. Not interpretation of this, so that you're not hearing the same thing over and over again. But even if it was the same thing over and over, it's still, there's nothing hackneyed about this transcendental. I was looking today, because on an iPod or an iPhone, it tells you how many times you've listened to a particular lecture. So I clicked on this one lecture today and I was looking and it says I've listened to it 5,000 times, and I'm thinking, how is that possible? How is that possible, 5,000 times? And I do listen to them, the same one, constantly. I don't switch around. I'll listen to the same one 10 times in a day. So then I thought, okay, that's how it's possible, because I don't change it. On one day I'll listen to that one lecture and I'll listen to it as many times as I'm listening to a lecture for that day. Because I'll hear things, because I'm not trying to be absent-minded, but I want to hear Prabhupada's voice. It's soothing, it's comforting, it's everything to me. And so, I'll listen to the lecture and I'll pay attention as I'm doing, but invariably my mind will distract me momentarily. But then all of a sudden I'll hear something and I'll think, wait, is this the same lecture I was just listening to? Because you're hearing it from a different angle again. Even moment to moment, the consciousness is increasing, being purified. So we can expect to have different realizations. That's that Tadarajas Tamo Bhavo, rising through the modes of material nature, getting purified, and acting. Pratyaksha Bhagamam Dharmyam, practical realization. It's very important. If you're not applying the philosophy, the simple way that devotees used to tell us in the early days was use it or lose it. Just like memorizing shlokas. We used to memorize so many shlokas, and then all of a sudden, I can't remember, just like now, I can't remember. I had hundreds, but now, because if you're not using them, if you're not preaching, if you're not going out and talking about the philosophy, then why would Krishna Sarvasya Chaham Riddhi Sanivisto? Why would you be remembering them? So use them or lose them. So try to preach at every opportunity. There's so many guests here. Just be friendly. You never know, that person, you may change his life. It's so important not to pass up an opportunity to speak to someone about Krishna. Don't think that just because they're in the temple, somehow or other they know Krishna, or they came here for a particular reason. Sometimes they're here just for the cultural experience. They heard about this nice place. But when they talk to a devotee and they hear the philosophy, that's you've broken through the samsara that has trapped the spirit soul for eons, millions of births, and you've started them on the path to self-realization. So this is our job. This is our duty. It's our duty to rescue these fallen conditioned souls. And it begins with this verse. You're not that body. Because we used to joke about that in the old days. We would tell devotees. I was a temple commander. So devotees would complain, oh, the water's cold. I'd say, you're not that body, Guru. Or, hey, my foot hurts. Oh, you're not that body. So, you can kind of, you don't want to misuse it. But, it was, to a certain extent, in the beginning, we did reinforce that concept in a very interesting manner. I didn't get prasadam. Well, you're not that body. One time, Gaur Hariprabhu, old devotee, I can't remember who it was, and I don't think it was me, but someone was complaining that they didn't get their quota of sleep the night before, and we rarely did. I mean, what was the quota? Sometimes it was 5 hours, sometimes it was 6 hours. So Gauri tried an analogy. It didn't quite work, because the devotee, he said, well, what happens when you skip a meal? Do you eat twice as much the next meal? And the devotee was thinking, well, yeah, I do. Because he was trying to say, when you miss sleep, do you sleep twice as much? But in some circumstances, some devotees would. But it's a fact. We don't try to carry it over. You know, we take it as if I'm tired, Prabhupada told us, if you're tired, sleep. If you're hungry, eat. It's not rocket science. It was just very simple. He kept it very simple for us. And we appreciate that. And therefore, we're still here, somehow or other, by his grace. Any questions or comments? Yes, Maitreya Prabhu. And then Prabhu. Yes, we have to have the mic, otherwise Mother Parvati will be very angry. Who's first? Prabhu first? Okay. Oh, see, he was watching everyone's hands.
As usual, you kept my attention for the class, which is really unusual. Usually I'm like somewhere else half the time. I heard on a lecture just a couple of days ago or something pop up. I said, "Yeah, one pinch of material desire, you have to come back." And I'm thinking, this is like, practically an impossible task, And maybe you'd say something on that. And another thing is there one thing that helped you a lot come closer to Krishna that you could share with us?
Well, material desires, I may have so many material desires in my heart, but it's the pinch that you act upon that will keep you bogged down, like the proverbial anchor. We all have material desires, and this is a cleansing process. Your dedication and your attachment for Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada told the devotee one time, when the devotee was complaining that, Prabhupada, I don't know how I'll be able to go back to Godhead. For the same reason. I have so many material desires, I have so many things. Prabhupada said, just hold on to my dhoti. I know a back door. So this was his response. So the essence is that if one is firmly attached to the spiritual master's lotus feet, by his efforts, by keeping those orders in his heart, okay, not abandoning them whimsically or capriciously for some momentary pleasure. If he can do that in this one life, then he has his ticket. He's got a good grip on Srila Prabhupada's dhoti. And Prabhupada will take him back. There's no doubt. At least in my mind, there's no doubt. I've seen so many great souls. I had the good fortune to associate with Jayananda extensively while we were constructing the Rath Yatra carts in New York in 1976. And I never saw a lapse in his attitude or consciousness where he wasn't either, and he told me many, things related to his personal life, but it was all in appreciation for what Srila Prabhupada had given him, how he had saved him. And this sometimes we have to acknowledge these situations, that how lost I was, and that Srila Prabhupada's mercy saved me. And therefore, I'm obliged, I'm grateful. So that gratitude, that gratefulness is a very strong motivation to remain, how can you say, faithful. Not to transgress the orders of the spiritual master. He didn't make it impossible. Someone could say, like, what did he tell us one time? He said, if I told you all the little rules and regulations, you would faint. He said that. As it was, there seemed to be so many. But he said, if I told you all of them, you would faint. And it's a fact. Sometimes we go someplace and, you know, you feel out of place because people are doing everything differently. And we think, well, Prabhupada didn't tell us that, but maybe it wasn't essential. You know, this is the difference between the upataya and vikalpate. You know, these aspects, these ritualistic aspects of devotional, so-called devotional or religious life that don't really contribute to the essential aspect of, you know, this developing firm faith and understanding of the nature of the philosophy in our relationship, the sambandha, abhideya, and prayojan. It doesn't get us there. You know, if I don't know how to hold the achman spoon, or if I don't know how to cup my hand in the proper mudra to receive the charanamrita, you know, in certain places, if you don't do that, you're, that's why they don't let us into the so-called, you know, Hindu temples. You know, because we're not qualified. But Prabhupada, by his mercy, qualified us. So this pinch of material desire, this is, that can be there. But one should be firmly, he should know, he should isolate that material desire and surround it with devotional activities. And try to be as engaged as possible and constant. And that's the Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam. What are the only two regulative principles? Always remember Krishna. Never forget him. So, you know, we can condense it. You know, I don't want to become simplistic because that just defeats the point. So many people, they're looking for complex philosophical answers. But once you've read Bhagavad-Gita, once you've read the Nectar Devotion, Nectar Instruction, and our basic literature, one only then has to surrender and engage in devotional service. And if he's not doing that, then he hasn't understood. He just hasn't understood, somehow or other. And so sometimes we see people come, and they stay for some time, and then again they go. Because they didn't get what they thought they were supposed to get. You know, whatever that was. And if you try to ask them, sometimes they can't really explain it. But some mental satisfaction, some philosophical level of appreciation that they think no one else or only a few people can understand. And yet these same people, if you give them Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's commentary on the Brahma Samhita, they can't make heads or tails of it. I mean, it's difficult for anyone to try to put that in the proper perspective. Because it says so much, and it defeats all mundane concepts of, you know, the so-called 3 dimensions of our visibly observable world. It's just, but that's just, like I said, it's beyond anything any philosopher has ever tried to put into words before. But yet here's Srila Bhaktisiddhanta speaking in the most natural way, as if anyone who read this should be able to understand it. And he is so far above everyone. Just amazing. But still, that's written just to give us a glimpse of how complex the philosophy is in one sense, but how simple it can be when it's spoken by the pure devotee according to the time and circumstances, specifically for those, you know, who are his submissive audience. Any other? Are there? Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah, Prabhu, I just want to ask your opinion on the new formulas that some devotees have produce to get people to read the books, because nowadays people are so distracted with their smartphone and electronics. They have very short attention span. Many books are sold still, but very few books are being read, according to some of them. So I heard that in ILS. There was one presenter there that from Los Angeles explaining that now they bring the young people to a mantra meditation, singing, music, and then they don't tell everything right away, but in due course of time, some show up more interest, then they introduce maybe a lecture, Bhagavad-Gita, or some kind of format that they can hear. So, and I saw that a few other places too, where people are not immediately given Prabhupada's books, but they're brought in some other ways, according to time circumstances, where they can take. And then later on, they are introduced to Prabhupada's books. So this is like a new formula to adjust to the present crowd of devotees, that people are out there. So I just want to know your opinion on this, good or bad, or in between, or whatever.
Well, as you mentioned, according to time and circumstances, there may be some audience for that. There's an audience for everything, actually. But there's a certain urgency that we should have with regards to distributing Prabhupada's books. That this is not something that we should wait and experiment on. We have a formula. It's been going on for so many years. What do they say? Don't reinvent the wheel. So if we've had success traditionally in distributing books, why do we want to put energy in something that may be successful only after a great deal of time? I mean, what's to say that they'll ever come to a point where, like you said, so 100 people come to a kirtan, that's nice, they're chanting Hare Krishna. You know, we're chanting Hare Krishna, we've been doing this since 1965 or 66 on the streets of New York, so that's nothing new. So then what's something new is that they're not immediately getting a book because they might not come back. I mean, what would be the consideration? We had a restaurant in Manhattan, and Prabhupada said something very interesting to one devotee, Nayana Briram, old devotee, joined on 2nd Avenue. He would work sometimes. I was in charge of the restaurant, so he would work sometimes in the restaurant, and he heard a conversation there at the New York Temple, and it's there in the conversation. I also seen it, but not. And he paraphrased it at the time. I didn't. When he told it to me, I didn't go back and check it. We didn't have the facility at that time. Prabhupada said that we don't have to build so many temples now. We have enough temples. We should build reading rooms and restaurants. And that was a very interesting point. And the reading room wouldn't be something disguised where people wouldn't know what they were coming into. And in our restaurant, when he told us that, we started to have books available, subsidized by the cost of the meal. And we would offer one to every person. We weren't afraid that if we gave a book to someone, they weren't going to come back to the restaurant. They don't want it, they'll leave it on the desk outside, you know, or they'll give it to a friend. We wanted to make sure that every person got a book, small book at that time, or a BTG. And we even had a place where they could, we had the subscription cards for BTG. They could fill them out and put them in a box if they wanted to. They would start a subscription that way. They could. So I like the direct method, personally. I don't see any reason to attempt, you know, but like I said, if this was China, maybe. Or Soviet Russia, you know, 20 years ago, yeah, I think that's what we had to do in one sense. You disguise it as a yoga center or mantra meditation center or something like that. But this is, you know, people are used to getting everything directly, and what can, you know, it's just like I said, it reminds me of when we were distributing record albums. And Prabhupada eventually declared that this is not really good. I mean, we were doing that to get Lakshmi so that we could distribute books in a subsidized fashion, but it takes unnecessary endeavor. You know, it's like trying to touch your nose by putting your hand around your head. I think that's the, it's done. So that's the short version. Yes, Rupa?
As you said, the Chaitanya Guru is asking us to how to surrender and how to bind. Similarly, when I got the Gita and read the Gita and was thinking what to do, then from inner voice told me, okay, you go find out where the temple and you go there. So when you found out and you associate with devotees, then you got the taste, everything. Another thing is just like you're listening to the lecture, I also listening to lecture Rupa. So since last week, 10 days, I'm listening the same lectures mostly. Just like Rupa is saying, if you chant John, 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 you don't get any benefit. If you have to chant Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So I was listening after this, again I'm listening same lecture. Again same thing I'm listening what Prabhupada is saying. So many times we see that how we are repeating those things again and again to rectify ourselves. How we can rectify ourselves. Hare Krishna.
And it's never hackneyed. You could listen over and over because it's transcendental. This is the test. You know, you couldn't listen to the same mundane book repeatedly. It becomes tiresome. So Maitreya had a question. He didn't get the mic. He's finished. Anyone else, Mataji? You have to pass the mic this way. Is the cord long enough? Yes.
This is actually not a question. I just wanted to comment
Yes,
on the,
please comment.
giving the books later on so as we don't scare them away or whatever. Prabhupada himself said that just by touching the book, they become spiritualized. Just by touching the book. Just by reading one word. I can't remember exactly. You might remember.
But that's, no, that is correct. He said that.
He also started out saying, if they read one line, then he said, no, just two, then he said, no, one word. I can't remember that exact quote. So that happened, and also we used to go traveling in the van, distributing books. We would become tired, and we would pull the van up. We were resting, we would just pull the van up on the sidewalk, and we would sit there, van loaded of ladies, and we would just sit there and wave our arms like this, and people would come over and we'd sell them a book without getting them out of the van, you know. We would just go like this, and they would come over and we'd hand them a book and talk to them a little while, and they'd give a Lakshmi and walk away in a happy mood. So also one other comment about not being completely, having material desires and how do we get rid of those. Well, it seems to me, I could be wrong, please correct me Prabhu if I am, but it seems to me that what's really super important is what you really want. If, you know, not what you unfortunately want, but what you really, really want in your heart. That seems to be an important factor because Krishna fulfills all desires. And he sees that in your heart, that you really, really want to know Krishna and to sit at his lotus feet, and you really, really want to get rid of these lower troubling things that come in your mind. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Mataji. Yeah, it's very important. Yes, Ramai. You have to get the mic, or whoever's getting it.
There was that time when Prabhupada gradually lowered the percentage, how much you have to be free, to get them down to 70%. Take you back to God.
Correct. Yes.
There's that statement by Narottam Das Thakur, by surrendering to the feet of these 6 Goswamis, Bhagavad-Gita, and it was there with Prabhupada in the first wave in India, and this point of Prabhupada's disciples being warned or told by others that, well, Swami Bhakti-yoga has done something very nice, but you have to come to me or go further to get higher instruction. And it was even one situation where one devotee was reinitiated from one of Prabhupada's godbrothers. And Prabhupada told Nanda that faith in the spiritual master is shown that one understands that whatever he has given me is perfect, and he's given me everything I need to advance to the highest position.
Thank you for that. Yeah, go ahead.
I'd just like to say that we shouldn't underestimate the younger generations also. There's certainly a big thirst for, because schools, they don't teach about God anymore. It's banned from everywhere. And there's that leaves a natural vacuum in all the young people. So there's a big thirst for exactly Krishna consciousness.
And
also, Prabhupada was planning for 10,000 years, and according to time and circumstance, we don't really see beyond the next year or two. But how do we know that in 1,000 years there'll be no electricity, so no iPhones, no record? So books are the basis, and Srila Prabhupada knew with determination and boldness to spread the books, spread.
Came up yesterday in Vancouver's glorification that the 19th ISKCON newsletter published by Rupa in 1976. This was at the time when book distribution was being stressed, doubled and redoubled, and Harinam Sankirtan had practically been eclipsed. That Prabhupada said that go on with book distribution and Harinam side by side.
Right.
So I would just like to attribute that. We have the experience in New York doing it like that, just change it. Well, even I had a sign on my table, books on yoga meditation, and then someone suggested change it to say books on spiritual knowledge. And all of a sudden, all the loosey-goosey, wavy-gravy people, no more, and just of the four, one was actually seeking me in knowledge, he is the highest. And all you would have to do is sit at the table, and when they come up and say, are you interested in spiritual knowledge? And you just follow your instructions and take it. It's just nectar. So, should always stick to the original.
yes, why not?
I agree with Mr. Rupa 110%.
Is there someone else, Manaji, wanted to have a question?
Srila Prabhupada said that even if they touch the book, see it, there is benefit. And I was always thinking that, how is it possible? I mean, where did Prabhupada get that? And then when I read, there's a Gaudiya Vaishnava book, and the name of the author escapes me right now. It's called the Bhakti-yoga, which describes how when Jiva Goswami sent Narottam Das Thakur and Srinivas Acharya and Shamananda Prabhu to Bengal, and they went into that big bullock cart, yeah. They had the books wrapped up there. And then one night they were camping out somewhere, and when they woke up, the books had gone. And so Srinivas Acharya sent Narottam and Shamananda to go ahead and preach, and he was going to stay behind and investigate and try to find the books. And somehow the books had been stolen. There was a king called Bir somewhere in Madhya Pradesh. And his astrologer had told him that there was a big treasure that was coming his way. And so he sends them backwards. He was a backward, he sent that king. And he sent these people to speak with the books. So somehow the Srinivas Acharya arrived there. I don't remember all the details. But then it seems that when the king, the treasure arrived, and they realized, oh, it's just books. But when he saw the books and his consciousness was changed.
calculated, not just on Bhagavad-Gita and Srila Prabhupada's books, but on any printed book is read eventually by at least 10 people. So in Canada, we used to distribute Back to Godhead magazines at these big 24-acre fairs that they have in Canada. And then when we were out of magazines, we would run around and collect all the magazines that people had thrown away and just redistribute them again and just keep doing that until there were no magazines left. So it's just a matter of getting the spirit and just doing it without thinking and just having a good time doing it. And don't try to make a better way. Srila Prabhupada made the best way in everything. Isn't that right? Prabhupada made the best way in everything.
Well, there's an interesting, we've heard Prabhupada quote this Nama Chintamani Krishna Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha. That, Krishna, his name, his fame, his pastimes, they're all the same. So these books are not simply material objects that we touch with our senses, but they're completely transcendental, which is for us to realize. Many have already realized it, and we're gradually realizing. We never, even sometimes we may take advantage or take these for granted, and we'll pile up the books in such a way that they're not properly respected or they're not situated in a respectful way. In the old days, we used to take cloth and cover the books when we would have them. We would get them, remnants of cloth usually from Prabhupada's, when he would have his desk and we would change the cloth. We would, get that cloth and cut it up into pieces and distribute it to the devotees, and they would make book covers out of it like that. So there were certain things that we would do to treat Bhagavad-Gita because we understood that this is actually Krishna. And that consciousness helped us in the beginning before we became complacent and sometimes lazy. They're not just periodicals, printed words on some that came off a mundane printing press. They became Krishna, through the agency of Prabhupada. Just like when they do when the deities are installed, they have the eyes covered, and then when the spiritual master finishes the installation, those coverings are removed, and the deities are considered to be present. So these books are our deities, actually. They're not just some mundane. And we have to take care. Not that this is any indication from my perspective, but when I left here, I had service here for 6 years continuously, 1984 to 1990. And when I left quite suddenly. So all of our household paraphernalia, I was here with my wife and kids. So we left, and all my household paraphernalia was left. And so usually that type of thing, everything's distributed. And that's fine. This is material life. You can get attached to it all you want, and at some point, if it's not in your interest, Krishna will take it away. So most everything disappeared, but a few things were somehow saved. Some photos that I'd taken over many years being in India, we got those back miraculously. That's usually not the way it happens. But most other things, my wife got quite some of her saris back, so she was happy about that. But most other things we didn't get back. All my books. I had, a room full of books because I had an office. And some which were hardbound, which I'd had since I joined the temple. My original Nectar Devotion, my Bhagavad-Gita, my teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So those were kind of dear to me. I didn't really care for other things. And so I'm thinking, all right, well, somebody's got them. They're using them someplace. But then a couple of years ago, when I came back, Mother Parvati said to me, when are you going to take this trunk? And I said, what trunk? What trunk? The trunk that was up in the Samadhi. I said, what trunk is that? She said, the trunk that you left here 30 years ago. So I went to look in this trunk, and mostly everything was just, because the insects get to everything. So they destroyed basically whatever was in that trunk. But they didn't touch my original Bhagavad-Gita, which I had bound by a company in New York City called Duray and Braun. They were very famous book binders. And so that Bhagavad-Gita, it was perfect condition except for a couple of nibbles. The bugs just wanted to taste Bhagavad-Gita. So I hadn't seen that Bhagavad-Gita since 1990, and all of a sudden Krishna gave it back. So these books are very special. They're not ordinary, in any way, shape. And that was the book that I purchased, that brought me to Krishna consciousness, essentially. So now I take a little better care of it.
Was it in Macmillan?
Yes, it was an original, 1972. Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah, one point regarding this one. Some of the devotees, they sleep in the morning, they just wake up and they just take the book and start reading. So I tell them, what is this? You are sleeping, you are in Rajaguna and Tamoguna, and you are taking the book and just reading. You should at least wash your mouth and face, and then you should read. Because this is Krishna, Bhagavatam and Bhagavad-Gita is not different from Krishna. So when you are touching, you should see that you should be little something clean, not complete clean, it is something clean. It does not just you wake up and just open the book and read.
You have to speak into the mic, though.
Vaikuntanath Prabhu in Saradiya, early devotees, they were here in Prabhupada's Kartik 72 Memory of Devotion, and he was understanding from Prabhupada that unless you're initiated, you can't go back home back to Godhead. And he was thinking of distributing so many books, and Prabhupada saying distribute books and save the people. So accompanying Prabhupada back from speaking from Rupa Swami Samadhi, right on the threshold of his step up into the rooms of Bhagavad Damodar, he asked him that. And Prabhupada looked at him very clearly right in the eye. If they read one line of my books, they are initiated.
Wow.
Yeah, because it means that they have established their connection. So whether this lifetime or another lifetime, Srila Prabhupada, we don't want to burden him coming back for us. Sometimes Prabhupada also mentioned that in different ways, just to emphasize. One time, one devotee, Rak Tak, Prabhupada's bodyguard, asked Srila Prabhupada, why does the spiritual master get sick? And Prabhupada's been asked that question several times, but in this occasion he said, because my second initiated disciples are not chanting their Gayatri mantra. So, who knows why Prabhupada said that to him. Maybe he knew that he wasn't chanting his Gayatri mantra. Since he was Prabhupada's bodyguard, he would see him regularly. But there's, we have to appreciate that Prabhupada is not an ordinary person. He's not. Many people have qualified it by saying this or that, the other thing. That's not my place. One should not try to impose his limited ability to appreciate, who the spiritual master is, and try to put him in some category, which is not. It's offensive in one sense. Srila Prabhupada is Srila Prabhupada. If you read these books, we understand that he's not an ordinary person. So when he's saying that these devotees, that these persons are initiated, it means they have taken that first step. That's what initiation means. They've taken that first step. They've read that line. And now it is just a matter of time. Just a matter of time. They will come to Prabhupada. Prabhupada didn't, I know one of our God sisters here, she used to drag her husband, who was Indian, to the temple. And at a certain point, and she was living outside, and at that time Prabhupada really didn't initiate many devotees living outside. It just wasn't a common thing. And she was an American lady, married to an Indian gentleman at that time. But Prabhupada made it a point that she should be initiated. He saw in her that determination, that dedication, the devotion. And so it is not, it's not for us to judge, who is qualified or not. The spiritual master sees that this person is qualified, then obviously they're qualified. And and with regards to book distribution and how someone comes in contact, and I've told this story, but it never ceases to amaze me that when you're distributing these books, sometimes we don't know how that person is impacted. We never see them again. Them and the book, they're gone. But in New York City, we used to distribute books, and I was a temple commander. I wasn't one of the book distributors. I would just go out after my duties were done, and I would, because that's what Prabhupada wanted us to do, distribute his books. So we would take a book bag, go outside, check out the books, make sure that we'd counted them. They were all noted down. Went to Central Park because it was close. And there's lots of benches, so people are sitting. I don't have to chase them. I'm not a book distributor. I didn't practice the lines. I wasn't well versed in the salesmanship and things like that. But I thought I should do my duty. So I found it fairly easy to just, approach, nice people sitting on the bench in Central Park. Please take it back to Godhead Magazine. Our temple is just up the block. Please come and visit us anytime. If you have any questions about spiritual life, we're here to answer them. Simple thing, and people would give whatever, in those days, 25 cents, 50 cents. And go to the next person. And then one day I was when Prabhupada came in 1976, he stayed at the temple for 11 days. So, we had different duties surrounding Srila Prabhupada. Some of us were his bodyguards, some of us were just various service in various capacities. So one day when I was outside of his sitting room, I would, if guests came, I would announce them to his secretary, ask them to have a seat. If there was another guest already in the room with Srila Prabhupada. So this couple comes upstairs, nice couple. And they, very politely said, we're here to see Srila Prabhupada. I said, oh, okay, have a seat. Let me check. Prabhupada's in there with someone else, but I let them know that there's another couple waiting, another guest. And Prabhupada would see anyone. It wasn't like his doors were closed. Devotees would come and go, people would come and go, newspaper reporters would come and go. Anybody could go and see Srila Prabhupada. He was so accessible in that sense, at least at that time. So when I came back from telling the secretary, and I sat down and I just continued to chant my japa, I could tell that this couple was staring at me, and I didn't know why at the time, and I'm thinking maybe something's not right. Your shika's not tied, your dhoti's not straight, whatever. Something's wrong. So I asked, politely, as politely as I could. I says, do I know you? And they just looked and said, don't you recognize us? I'm thinking, this is always a bad sign. Someone says, don't you recognize us? I said, no, not, but help me. They said, you gave us our first Back to Godhead magazine in Central Park. And of course, for them, that was a big deal. But in that day, they could have been one of, I don't know how many people that I'd approached. But they said, and now we're getting an opportunity to meet Srila Prabhupada. And they had ordered all of Prabhupada's books. You could order from the back of the Back to Godhead, from the BBT, and they'd read all of Prabhupada's books. And to them, they were in ecstasy that they're getting a chance to meet Srila Prabhupada. And they were just very nice couple, obviously, whatever. Well, you're not poor if you're living in Manhattan in those days. And they were living not far, because I remember they told us they were living not far from where I distributed that book. So I had, but very nice, but that's the way it works, is that you, whether you know it or not, there's an impact. So just don't think that I'm just distributing this magazine or this book. No, it's changing someone's life. It's changing someone's life. So we have to have that faith. And of course, I'm sure that the class was supposed to be over a long time ago, but
Nobody wants to leave.
if there's any other comments or questions, I guess we can take.
Very quick final comment was you said about changing people's lives,
Yeah.
and you said before they also save people's lives.
Yes, also save. Changing and saving. That's our, we could have a new motto. Changing and saving lives since 1966. Sounds like a t-shirt, eh? Jai, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, Bhagavad-Gita ki. Jai.